as we all know, this Eminem album has been causing a bit of a stir. And mainly because of the diss track that he had. Um, I talked about it in the last video I did on Lord Jamar and just the problems that I had with the lyrics towards him. I'm going to focus on a particular line. For one, as you can see, M's take on Beastie Boys' License to Ill album cover, which is a whole nother conversation that we can get into in the comments section if you'd like. But what I'm focused on is the lyrics and a particular line that he mentioned. So I'm going to read the lyrics. And Lord Jamar, if you guys get a chance, go to his Yad I mean. I could never say that. You know what I mean? Or, yeah, just look up Lord Jamar and type him breaking down these lyrics. And Lashid For You actually has a whole video on that. So go to her channel and check that out too. Very thorough YouTuber, one of my favorite YouTubers at that. Shout outs to her. But let's read these lyrics. As far as Lord Jamar, you better leave me alone. Sorry, let me start over. As far as Lord Jamar, you better leave me the hell alone, or I'll show you an Elvis clone. Walk up into this house you own. Thrust my pelvic bone. Use your telephone. Then go fetch me the remote. Put my feet up and just make myself at home. I belong here, clown. Don't tell me about the culture. I inspired the Hobsons, the Logics, the Coles, the Shans, the K-Dots, the 5-9, and oh, I bought the world 50 cent. You did squat, piss, and moan. Now, the one that I'm focusing on is, I'll show you an Elvis clone. For all of you guys that don't know, this is a man by the name of Sam Phillips. Sam Phillips was the guy that ran Sun Records, and he recorded Howlin' Wolf and B.B. King and a bunch of other cats. You guys could look up more information on him. The one thing that I'm focusing on is a quote that he is quoted saying. Phillips, who died on July 30th in Memphis at the age of 80, is also credited with the line, "If I could find a white man who had the Negro sound and the Negro feel, I could make $1 billion." Philip used to say this over and over, remembers his former secretary and right-hand woman at Sun Records, Marion Keisker. He said this in regards to Elvis, and he found that voice. Both of these guys were, of course, fans of black music. From what I read about Sam Phillips, he really wanted to cross over the music, and because of the racist white demographic, couldn't do that on a large scale, from what I understand. Now, there were whites that listened to rock and roll. The movie Hairspray is an example of even that. But you also saw, that was, some people would argue that was a minority. I don't know. But I'll say this. There was still a lot of people in white society that looked at rock and roll the way that they look at hip hop now. I've touched on this in a previous video. Hip hop is the scapegoat, like rock and roll was. I forget the title, but you guys, it's a similar title. You guys can check that out if you want. I'll put it in the descriptions. But Elvis himself was a fan of people like Rosetta Tharpe and listened to gospel and hung around, black areas and was really into the blues and all that. But the thing is, unfortunately, that quote says a whole lot about the record industry. And people don't understand how black people got phased out of rock and roll in the mainstream light of it. And how, you got a Nile Rodgers that basically sent a demo into a record company, a major record company, and they told him that when they found out he was black, that they could not market him as a rock band. You had groups like Mother's Finest make songs like Niggas Can't Sing Rock and Roll, basically saying like, hey, we invented this thing. What do you mean we can't sing rock and roll? Funkadelic, off of One Nation Under a Groove, had a song called Who Says a Funk Band Can't Play Rock and Roll Music? Now, Funkadelic, great funk band, one of my favorite funk bands, was a heavy, psychedelic, hard rock band. And they were in one of the first encyclopedias of heavy metal in the early 80s, when I remember being at the library and checking out this encyclopedia of heavy metal and saw them before I even heard Maggot Brain or Standing on the Verge of Getting It On. I was like, this is interesting. My dad actually turned me on to the earlier Funkadelic, even though I was familiar with the other stuff. But even on that other stuff, you hear, songs like Lunch Meat. I can never say that long title, but it's a heavy song. Or, the song that I mentioned about Who Says a Funk Band Can't Play Rock and Roll Music. But you see this time and time again. And even after the 70s, Lenny Kravitz had problems. The reason that the Black Rock Coalition, even before Lenny Kravitz came about, was established because there was racism against black people playing rock and roll music. It's so messed up when you think about the face of rock and roll and just how marketing racially on racial lines played into that. Now, some people might say there's demographics, but when you tell a band, to change their style because they can't be marketed because of their skin color, that says a whole lot. And Elvis pretty much represented that to me because of just them lauding him as a king. So the reason that Eminem's Elvis clone line was problematic to me was because of this. What are you trying to say? I said it in the last video. You want to phase the black people out of out of hip hop? Like that, you got to think about why you said that, man. You don't just say stuff like that. Now, granted, I'm sure he loves hip hop. He wouldn't be doing it if he didn't. But the thing is, to use such a line of disrespect, first of all, saying that a black man should fetch you a remote control as if he's a freaking slave, for one. Two, saying that you would be an Elvis clone and just basically be used the same way he was to kind of give the white face of rock and roll as something to say that, hey, we invented this as white people, versus to say that, hey, I'm just in this and it's definitely invented by black folks, and I love the music. Now, I'll be honest, I don't go as hard on Elvis as I used to, because especially me being a rock and roller, it was just like, you got to be kidding, I'm going to play whatever kind of music I want. And I'm like, hey, this dude, pretty much Like I could not stand Elvis. I'm still not a fan till this day, but I'll tell you this. I genuinely believe that he really dug the music, and also because a lot of people like James Brown and even Little Richard, who should be called the king of rock and roll. Little Richard even gave him props on helping to cross over the music to a larger demographic. And from what I understand, I think it even made the original artist a little bit of money when it came to the residuals and all that. But still, even when you think of people like Screamin' Jay Hawkins, the guy that did I Put a Spell on You, a lot of black folks did not benefit from rock and roll the way that Elvis did. And it's messed up when you think about it. You know, it's a shame that somebody like a Rosetta Tharpe recently, within the last few years, got put into the Museum of Rock and Roll, and she wasn't really even heralded, you know, like as a queen, you know. And that's one of the reasons that I started doing the Black History of Rock and Roll, you know. But getting back to Eminem, it's just like, even throwing that out there, that's disturbing. And for me, I don't respect that. I don't respect that at all, as not only a rocker, but also a hip hop fan. You know, it's just like, okay, is this your intention now? To be the Elvis of hip hop? For black society, that's a negative. It's not a positive. And whether Elvis meant to or not, it's the powers that be that put his face as the king of rock and roll, and his face as being the beginning of rock and roll, which I've said in other videos, he is not the beginning of rock and roll. Rock and roll was a few decades before the 50s. Like it was going on a few decades before that. And even in the 50s, when rock and roll was going on, he was not the main dude. There's a lot of cats. You know, you had Big Joe Turner, Big Mama Thornton. I mentioned Rosetta Tharpe already. You know, Ike Turner, who did Rocket 88 and had probably the first overdriven, distorted guitar recorded on an album, from what I understand. You know, you got heavier rockers like Bo Diddley, shock rockers like Screamin' Jay Hawkins, glam rockers like Little Richard. And the list goes on and on and on. But the thing is, everybody just sees Elvis as the king. There are people before him. You know, it's like, I don't want to see hip hop being usurped like that. And to be honest, I'll be honest with you guys. I do like some white rappers. I'm not like, I appreciate talent. You know, no matter what. I listen to white rockers as well. My thing is this. I don't like when manipulation and just straight up racism plays a part in music. You know, when you're telling me that the king of rock and roll is a white dude, when I know and sure as what I see in front of my face that it's not a white person, and that there's been people playing rock and roll long before that, that says a whole lot to me. And Eminem taking up that mantle now of being that guy to usurp hip hop. I mean, he's pretty much saying that. You know, and I'll be honest, I actually like, you know, some of the things that he's done, you know, musically and lyrically, you know, at least the earlier stuff. But you know, I mean, like as a rapper, but I don't see him as I said before, the second coming. And plus, this was also before I found out about all the racist stuff that he said. I didn't know about that until years later. I thought some of his lines were pretty funny on his first album. But then when I found out about like some of this other racist stuff, I'm like, okay, where are you coming from, dude? What's the deal? It's a trip, like, I mean, you have cats like Brother Ali that would break something like this down. And I'm actually curious to know what Brother Ali even thinks about Eminem at this point, you know. But there are rappers also that should be getting more props than even Eminem, in my opinion. And I think that's what even Lord Jamar was saying too. When I think of a wordplay genius, I think of a Razzcazz. Razzcazz, oh man, I'd listen to that dude and just keep. I mean, it's you would want to keep rewinding what that dude was saying. He not only had wordplay, he had all kinds of book smart stuff. Yeah, I was laughing at an interview that he did. I think it was in The Source, where he said he didn't want people to think that he was the conscious N-I-G-G-A. I don't like saying that word. And so he kind of dumbed down his raps on his second album. That's how good he was. But at the same time, he was the first one to actually say that, and this is what kind of made me mad about him. Even though he could, I mean, shoot, that dude was, I mean, he's a bad lyricist. But to say that you're the god of rap, come on, man. But I think, a Razzcazz and Chino XL's another one. Now, people back in the day were kind of not cool with Chino because he was kind of an iconoclast. And even when people would also compare Eminem to him too. But I think Chino was just like no gloves and all blood, to be honest. I think he made Eminem look like a freaking Sunday school student with a lot of the stuff that he said. But the thing is, Chino, he could write. And he could give a scenario like my favorite song by him was Ghetto Vampire. I mean, that you could look at that song in so many different ways, Another lyricist that I would also, talk about is Cam. A lot of people, I mean, Tupac definitely, he knew how to write and all that. But I would say Cam also, because Cam was the guy that was like a conscious rapper, but he had, street cred, and he was what everybody always says Tupac is. Tupac was like that sort of street dude, but he was conscious. But Cam even more so, him being a member of the Nation of Islam influenced that, but also being and growing up in South Central where, he was from, like, or Watts, I'm sorry. Yeah, Cam's from Watts. There's so many great lyricists, and the thing is, it's just a trip. I always wonder, like, why are these great artists ignored, man? Like, why couldn't a Razzcazz be where Eminem is? Why couldn't a Cam be where Eminem is? Why couldn't an AC alone, be where Eminem is? I mean, AC alone, along with the rest of the Freestyle Fellowship, they're icons of hip hop to me, Not just to me, but I mean, like, those dudes, not only do they have the wordplay and the chopping going, which they're pretty much pioneers at a lot of that. They had the lyrics. I mean, inner city griots, or I like what they kind of use the play off of words, inner city griots, or instead of inner city riots, But those dudes, I mean, like, you listen to an album like The Book of Human Language and tell me that that's not some lyricism. Of course, you have Nas. Every time I think of Nas, I think of something my brother actually showed me about that song about the bullet, dude. That song is ill. Like, anybody I don't know of anyone that has ever written a song like that. How could you, like, I mean, man, there's so many different MCs. I need to probably just do a video on that myself. You got a Lab Tech 1 that kind of in my opinion, took cues from Razzcazz when it came to his epic raps. He did 3 different, like, it's like you're reading an epic novel raps. He did one on economics, he did one on Christianity, he did another on racism. They're like, I think one of the ones is like 14 minutes long. It's a long, but you're listening. You're just listening the whole time. That's lyrics right there. Eminem is not the only cat. And it's funny, like, I mean, I grew up listening to underground hip hop, even as a punk rocker myself, and I'm a musician, dude. I listen to everything. I've played everything. I've played even, you know, in hip hop sessions and all that. But I mean, that, how could I say this? There's so many different MCs, man. So many different rappers that are just pristine lyricists, style wise. So many different styles, you know, and just amazing. You know, I like the fact that Lashid For You, shout outs to her, mentioned Master Ace too, you know, who people don't even freaking know, dude. Or like, you know, Lord Jamar mentioned the Scarface. I remember, I think the song was called Mr. Scarface that I heard, you know, besides his stuff in the Ghetto Boys, which I really liked a lot of his spits, you know, in Ghetto Boys, because they were very, very detailed. You have Willie D, who's a good writer and would make cats laugh, but Scarface, dude, you know, that dude, like, he's like an epic novelist, Tim. I mean, too, without making like a long song. I mean, it's like you're reading a book when you're listening to Scarface. You know, how come lyrics? I mean, rappers like that don't have the status that Eminem does. I don't understand. And it's cool, you know, to see Kendrick getting his glory and all that too. But I'll tell you this, man. I'm like this. We don't need an Elvis clone. We have a lot of legends here. We have legends in hip hop and also in rock and roll. That's why I do the Black History of Rock and Roll series, to show you those legends. But with the hip hop legends, it's not like they were back in the day. A lot of these legends are still around. You know? I mean, there are also black rock legends that are still around too, but I mean, like, just an overwhelming bunch of hip hop artists that still play out. And I'm just scratching the surface, even with the ones that I've mentioned, you know. I really have a problem with that Eminem line, because it's almost like he's declaring that he's going to be, or that he is, what they deemed Elvis to be. Eminem is not the king of rap. I'm not saying that he said he did. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not saying that he said that he is. But when you throw across the line like that, what are you trying to say? Are you saying that you are? You're feeling yourself when you do that. So in a sense, even thinking about that now, is that what you're saying, Eminem? You know, like, it makes me think that's what he is saying. You know, it's just like, okay, is he saying that? We don't need another Elvis clone. We have a bunch of them. We had a bunch in rock and roll that they kind of deemed over a lot of the black artists that were putting in work. And of course, most people in the world call Elvis the king. I don't. Elvis is not the king of rock and roll. He is a peasant of rock and roll among the kings and queens of rock and roll. And Eminem, I look at you as the same within the hip-hop sphere of things. We don't need an Elvis clone. We didn't even need Elvis to begin with.